Well, folks, it's over. Georgia State is 1-11. They lose in the regular season finale at Old Dominion, 27-10. The second year of Dell McGee's head coaching tenure ends. The Panthers are 4-20 through 24 games under Coach McGee. Exceeded expectations in the sense that they were 27.5-point dogs, and the game never really felt like coming close to hitting that. Up 10-0, and then 27 points unanswered given up to the Monarchs. David joined me as always. We'll get to the game. We'll get to the stats. I guess initial read. I always filibuster for like 8 minutes before letting you have a say, so I want to not do that on this episode. And I think we'll both have plenty to say over the course of it. But we're strictly sticking to the game that happened on Saturday for the time being. We will get to other things that come to mind after the fact, but I'm doing it again. What do you got from this game as I pull up the stats?
This game was funny because I think if you only watch the first half, you probably thought that the team with like 8 wins was the team on Georgia State's side, just because they looked like the best version of some of what we've seen outside of the quarterback position. And I don't say that to get on Veyer. I don't think he was really that bad. But you know, they were running the ball effectively. They were moving the ball through the air, and the defense was the brightest spot of the first half, I thought personally. You know, I think obviously Old Dominion did end up tying the game in the end by the end of the second quarter, but the defense was bottling up Colton Joseph. They were allowing some movement on the ground from Devin Roche, I think. But it wasn't like they were allowing a ton. So I was pleasantly surprised with, the way that the first quarter went, the way that the second quarter went. And then the wheels kind of just came off there for the defense. And, Joseph's a good quarterback. We talked about his running abilities. We talked about his passing coming in. I'm not totally surprised that by the end of the third quarter, things had flipped so significantly, and James Madison's way. Excuse me, Old Dominion's way. Good Lord, not James Madison.
The only other team that Georgia State didn't allow to score 30 points. So I guess
correct.
Next year you got to change everything. Schedule 12 games against teams from the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia. Excuse me. Exactly.
But this game kind of felt emblematic of Georgia State football this year. And it sucks because for the majority of this game, you could say that Georgia State was in it. You could say that, even when they were down 17, like they had a couple of drives and, would get a couple of first downs and, would move the ball and then just completely stall after that. Just bad situational football. And I remember I actually wrote down, and I had to cross it out later. I wrote down the note that, for the first time, when they went up 10-0, specifically when they went up 10-0, for the first time, in a few weeks, maybe since the FCS game, they actually looked like they were playing complementary football, where it's like, all right, the defense does get a stop after a 3 and out. And then the offense does move the ball and, got the field goal. So, they were doing things to kind of piggyback off each other in a way that we hadn't seen. There have been games this year where the offense will put a couple of scoring drives together, but then, like in the South Alabama game, for example, the defense wouldn't do anything, or the defense would get off the field, and the offense also couldn't do anything. So, it was nice to see for at least 30 minutes that, the good guys in blue were, doing things that we wanted to see them do all season. But, ultimately a team that, put up 303 rushing yards was just going to be way too much for Georgia State to handle. And here we are. So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. It was kind of a punt fest both ways in the first quarter, scoreless. It's back-to-back weeks with scoreless first quarters. I don't know what that's about. And then, yeah, they get the kind of quick fire scoring drive. I think it was like 5 plays. Just bam, bam, bam. Jordan Simmons pops a long run into the red zone. They go tempo, and then Christian Veyer to DJ Avery for a 4-yard touchdown pass, his first touchdown in his college career. And then the next play on offense for Old Dominion, Colton Joseph just completely sails a pass over the middle of the field right to Jalen Jones. Georgia State's basically already in near enough to field goal range when the drive starts, even though it was moved back by a penalty on the interception return, and they get the field goal there. And so, yeah, I feel like in hindsight, not getting touchdown there, one, fits perfectly with the way this team has not made opportunities count on offense when they've gotten their chances, but also feels like if they go 14-0, even though it would have been a 2-score lead either way, felt different. Obviously, then Old Dominion goes down. Their first real good drive of the game happens. They march all the way down to the goal line themselves, but can't punch it in, held to a field goal. So maybe you kind of arrest the momentum there. It's like, now you just have to avoid the momentum play that completely shifts it in ODU's direction. And then very shortly after, Veyer throws a pretty bad pick to a covered receiver. The defender came down with it, eventually kind of bobbled it, but sets them up prime position. I think it was 2 plays later that it was a touchdown run for Devin Roche that ties the game at 10, and then all the goodwill that had been built up for the first 15, 20, 25 minutes of the game was gone, and you were fighting against it on the road, against a team and a crowd that had found some juice finally and didn't want to lose on senior day, all the rest of it, have found ways to get the ground game going against basically everyone that they've played. And so at a certain point, you look at the stats, Colton Joseph was 9-22, 106 through the air with a pick. He wasn't good throwing the ball. And some of that was Georgia State, some of that was just, I don't know, maybe it was a windy day.
They were doing a weird tempo thing that I feel like did not work at all early, and I think that was partially why Georgia State was being effective, because they would just get set with 25 seconds on the clock and then just stand there. And it wasn't like they were looking for another play. They would just stand there. But they would be running an off tempo. I don't know. It was just did not seem like they got Joseph in rhythm at all. So that's why his passing was horrible.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you get a game plan, you see something on tape, and I think it's something they had done for most of the season based on what the commentary team was saying, but it might be one of those things that you go into a week expected to handle things a certain way, and then when you do it that way and you don't score any points in the first quarter, you start to think about things again. And I think the ultimate adjustment was just sticking with the run game. Obviously, you look at the difference there. They ran it 54 times. They only threw it 22. They just kind of stuck to what was their bread and butter and what, frankly, had worked against Georgia State a lot of the time this season, and eventually they were able to pay it off. The total stats there, Old Dominion ends up winning total yardage 409 to 283. Georgia State does take passing yardage 154 to 106, but as it's kind of the story of the last 2 seasons, and if you want to take it all the way back to the Trent Miles years when they were putting up a bunch of passing yards and losing a lot of games, there's not a correlation there really, especially when you only have 154. That's not some grand total to have reached. And then there's the big gap. Thought it was another good day, not a great day for Georgia State running the ball, but when you're going up against a team that gets 303 on the ground, 5.6 yards a carry, you're at 129 on 4.3 yards a carry. There's a bit of a difference there, and that's what we ultimately saw on the scoreboard. Ted Hurst plays. Sounded from earlier in the week that he was going to be good to go. Dell was giving a lot more positive noises about him than he was about Cameron Brown, who does not play. He gets just barely over the 1,000-yard mark. He gets 7 catches, 76 yards. Had a incredible toe touch right on the sideline in the first half that I think I don't know, I say I think twice. I think it was a catch. I think the toe comes down in bounds before his heel touched out of bounds, but I also think it helped that they called it a catch live and there wasn't going to be enough to overturn it from the angles they had. But that ultimately is what made the difference for him getting to 1,000. He ends up with 1,004. That makes him the 4th Georgia State receiver after Albert Wilson, Penny Hart, and Jamari Thrash to reach 1,000 yards in his Georgia State career. It is the, I want to say, 4th most in receiving yards a receiver has gotten in Georgia State in a single season for Georgia State. It is the 5th highest total. 1,004 is the 5th highest. And he is 4th all-time in career receiving yards with 1,965, which there's a bit of a gap between him and the guys in front of him. It is Albert Wilson, it is Penny Hart, it is Robert Davis. But when you consider he was only here for 2 years, it's not that far off. It is an impressive haul that he had managed to get nearly 1,000 yards in each of his 2 seasons at Georgia State, and I was personally glad for him he got that mark. I think he's flipped to 3rd in receiving yards in the Sun Belt behind Bo Sparks, who already was ahead of him, and Georgia Southern's Camden Brown, who had a great final game as they won bowl eligibility at Marshall. But I think looking at past Sun Belt honors lists, Ted is still going to at least be the 3rd receiver on the all-conference first team. Perfectly warranted. You got to highlight your bright spots where they come, and I think that's a bright spot that I don't know where it'll shake out, but I think when all is said and done, he will be the best draft pick in Georgia State history come next April.
Yeah, I think so too. He definitely has NFL traits that I think a few other Georgia State receivers have not had, namely size. Like, he's definitely a bit bigger than some of the other guys, so would really hope that he gets his name called on day 2, something like that. I think there's definitely a possibility, day 2, day 3.
But, and this is where it turns to just the symptoms, the traits of this team that have led to this 1-11. Like you said, there have been games that have been winnable. There were games last year that could have flipped to, maybe you go 5-7 instead of 3-9, even if you still miss a bowl. There were some 1-score games that they lost, but it's the inability to stack plays together, and I talked about the interception that Veyer threw that was just kind of like the worst time for a pick. There's just a lot of that going on, where it's like you're having the one thing that can't happen at the time that it happens, and just not executing in moments you need to, where it's 10-10 near the end of the first half. After that really nice catch that I mentioned that Ted Hurst made, they marched into the red zone. Very clear they were kind of playing the clock down, didn't want to give ODU a chance to get a possession, score, tie, or take the lead, whatever, at the end of the half, which I understand. Playing for the field goal, but also there were some deeper shots near the end zone taken as they're trying to maybe score a touchdown, but wanting to kill the clock as much as they can. Ends up being a 29-yard attempt for Liam Rickman, who had made earlier from a similar spot, and he does not make it. And so it's a 10-10 game at the half, and Georgia State gets the ball at halftime, so it would have been an opportunity to get some points up, score again in the second half, and then you're up 10 again like nothing ever happened. So I get the thought process. I don't hate it. You ultimately have to trust your kicker to make those type of kicks, even in college. I know #college kickers, it's a mess, but you ultimately have to rely on them to make those. There's a question earlier in the year when they just couldn't make anything. It's like, if it's 40+, are you just leaving the offense out on the field? But I don't think that you have to just never kick field goals. You need to have a certain distance you're comfortable with, and he just didn't make it. But this is something we've seen where just kind of can't make those momentum plays count. You could certainly argue that helped ODU get some momentum, continue momentum into the break, because it stayed a tie game when they had really not been at their best at all. Look into the total yardage, and the discrepancy really comes in the second half. But at halftime, Georgia State had edged them 205 to 173. It flips in the second half to 236 to 78 in favor of ODU. So kind of the story there. And after punting 5 times in the first half, ODU did not punt a single time in the final 2 quarters of the game. And that's where kind of the things continue. Couple of 4th down decisions that, there's 4th and shorts in their own territory that Georgia State elects to punt. One of them, the first one they did, basically immediately regret for that decision because Devin Roche returned the punt basically to where they were punting from. I think it was a 51-yard punt and a 47-yard return. So, they basically netted 4 yards on the decision, which you only needed 1 yard. And they did it again after getting stuffed on 2nd and 3rd down and short runs for nothing. On the 4th and 2, they punted. Believe ODU scored on that drive. And then the last one, which is maybe in normal circumstances the most defensible, but just kind of felt too much like the Ole Miss game for my liking, where you're down 17 late. The game is basically over, but not officially. It's 6.5 left. It's 4th and 15 about midfield. They punt it back to ODU instead of just doing the Ted Hurst DPI offense, where you just throw it up to Ted Hurst, see if you get a call, whatever it might be. You're already down 17. It felt a bit like saving face, and if we punt, it's going to set ODU back a good bit, and they're probably not going to score again because they're probably not going to look to do anything but run the ball and run the clock out. And as it turns out, that's what happened. ODU did not give the ball back after that. Ran the clock all the way down. And it just kind of is the same things I'm asking after the Ole Miss game, where it's kind of an abdication in the second half. They just stopped running any semblance of offense. It's like, let's just get out of here. It's like, is that the image you really want for your program? Like, I get it in week one where you're trying to save bodies and you're trying to keep everyone healthy, and that game is not where you win or lose the season, and so I get it. But in this one, guys are playing in their final game. Got guys like THERSday that, you know, any more tape you can get to get them in the NFL against good good teams they're playing on their schedule couldn't hurt. I don't understand the thought process there. It felt very much like I don't want to lose this game by 34 because that might happen if we give them the ball in plus territory here. And I get it, 4th and 15 is not a very high probability of success, but you're in a situation where you're down 17. That's not a high probability of success either, but you're going to have to take chances to maybe make those odds better. And instead you opted to just kind of give the game away there. And it just felt, I just don't know what the message it's supposed to send is.
I mean, the message is we don't trust our defense, which I don't know that there's a ton of disagreement from me there, but I do agree with you that there were a ton of times this year where just you look at what the decision was and you look at kind of where you think that the team should be, and those two things don't really square well, because I also agree with you, because let's say you get 10 yards of those 15. That's where the ball is, you know? Like, it's not like you have to just run a play that gets nothing, you know? I don't know. This year was just such a frustrating sequence of events when it comes to stuff like that, because they absolutely had an opportunity there to do something, you know? It wasn't like they couldn't do anything.
Yeah, I guess this is... I do want to... couple of different shout-outs, I guess, for this one. First is, you mentioned it earlier of like not wanting to kind of throw extra barbs Christian Veer's way, and I would echo that and just go on to say that, like, it would just feel so antithetical to everyone's thoughts on the way college football is nowadays, where it's mercenaries, everyone's leaving every year, you're not getting any kind of sticking togetherness. He could have left after basically being clear that he wasn't going to be the starter this year. When it ended up being he was going to be the starter, I remember a lot of people who were not that satisfied that he was probably going to start the Ole Miss game as it ended up happening. He didn't need to stick around, and I saw through the course of the year there were moments, especially I remember the Vanderbilt game when he was on the sidelines, that he was just in Cameron Brown's ear the entire time, presumably just saying good things, keep telling where his eyes are at maybe in a moment on the sideline watching the offense operate or whatever it might be. You could tell that he had not given up on the team. He was there for his teammates. He was always an interesting quote when we spoke to him a couple of times through the media. I just don't feel interested in, like, yes, he did not have a good game in this one. I thought the stats maybe lied a little bit in the Troy game because he was at least hitting some explosives, and the THERSday catch that I've mentioned a couple times now was the only 20-plus yard catch in this one, and there were just some wayward throws. The pick was pretty rough. But I don't want to make it a thing where it's like he was the third-string quarterback as the season played out. He was forced in this situation, and he stuck around, and so I don't feel that interested in making a big thing about that. And so if that's your scene, go for it. But at the end of the day, end of his college career, he got a chance to go start a game, and it was not maybe thrown into the best situation to do so. And the other person I wanted to mention is Jalen Jones, safety, who's, he steps up earlier in the year.
Where I was just about to say, I got some defensive shout-outs when you're done, so definitely.
Yeah, no, we can share the love there. He had the 2 turnovers for the game, and you could, let's just call a spade. I don't know anyone who looks at that play that thinks that's a fumble, but Jalen Jones jumped on that loose ball, and he gets the pick earlier in the game, just does what a safety's supposed to do. He's in the outfield, he's kind of playing last man, and the ball floats right to him, and he makes the catch and makes a nice return. That it's not his fault some of the yardage got pulled back on a penalty. He's just running at that point. But you want to see those type of ball hawk qualities from your defensive backs, your safeties, and that's something that over the course of the year has not really been there. But when you look at the plays that have happened, you look at these two. He was involved in the safety One of them, maybe the Murray State one. Remember when there was a safety in back-to-back games this year? That was crazy. It was either the Memphis or the Murray State one he was involved with. I believe it was the Murray State one. That's a guy that if he's sticking around, you're trying to build something about making a defense improve from what was a major regression here in 2025. You've seen the pieces from him, and he's a guy that has been here his whole career. So as people want to do and kind of poo-pooing the state of CFB right now, this is a guy that you can build around, I think, at the back end that has been Georgia State through and through his entire career. And you hope that continues, I think. That you've seen, especially in this game, what you can build on with him being there. He's had a good season.
I agree with you. And I had to look up the passing defense just to fact check myself so I didn't talk out of my butt here. And it was not good. Like, I say this because the entire season it was not good. But specifically in this game, and for guys who I am very curious to see how their offseason is going to go leading into next year, I really thought that Tyson McCreary was not bad yesterday. I really thought that he played pretty well. I also thought that Deuce Walker was... I don't know, man. There's something about his coverage skills that really make me believe like he can be a lockdown defensive back. You know, and I know that there was I believe he was called for one of the DPIs, which like
it took a DIC Hopkins interception off the board. It was it was one of those things where like yes, it was pass interference, but also the receiver didn't have a chance. That was going to be a pick no matter what. But it's just like that's why don't get grabby because you don't know like the receiver. Or the quarterback could sail that throw, which is what happened. But
correct.
DSC Hopkins, another guy. He's had a good couple weeks, I think. He looked good in the Troy game as well.
Right, like I think you and I are not the type of people who will shy away from takes, and we are also not the people to shy away from when our takes are wrong. I think this game and a couple of the other games on an individual play basis are some of the things that we saw with this secondary and some of the things that we saw with this defense. Because ultimately, I think these guys were just young. You know, I mean, I think the oldest person that I said here was a redshirt sophomore. You know, so it's like...
young in playing time, which is ultimately what matters in this sport. Is experience is the best thing for success. And not a lot of guys in the secondary had so much of it heading into this season.
Exactly.
But and saw strides.
Just real quickly, the last one I wanted to shout out was Kendrick Walker, the linebacker. I think, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that Georgia State is certainly missing that internal linebacker presence. I think you saw some strides in this one as well, and you've seen some strides as the season went on, specifically with Walker. He's a junior, don't know what next year's going to hold or anything like that, but I thought that was a solid game from him as well. And like you're saying, like we've seen strides with some of these players. You know, it's not like that individually was what, sunk them. Sometimes other teams just make plays. That happens.
Yeah, funny that he hadn't really been the starter until like the South Alabama game. He appeared in all 12 games, but Walker's finishing the year third in tackles with 57. And second on the team with 6.5 tackles for loss. So kind of late to the show. You had Josiah Robinson and Demaine Wilson starting the season, and then you have Kobe Owens slide in there behind Demaine after he gets hurt. And then it was only after Owens got hurt that we really saw Walker play, and he was showing up, making tackles, which is kind of what you're wanting from your inside linebacker. So he sticks around. It's another guy that it was kind of late in the season you finally saw it, and I think you're looking maybe for like real. If I had to pick one area that you're looking in the offseason that you need real impact from, it's you need to add one of those type of inside linebackers. I don't know that, I think that Walker can play a part. Maybe he is going to be that guy after another offseason of growth. But if I'm looking at the places where there wasn't a ton of those type of plays over the middle of the field, how they kind of got picked apart by some tight ends and the like over the course of the season. It just feels like you need something there at linebacker, just kind of an all-conference type effort from someone next season if the as part of the defense getting better. But
they should move him outside, by the way. Like I agree with you because I think they should move him outside.
Interesting. Certainly you could not look at much with the way this defense went and think you just should go business as usual. You change things up, take the spring to do whatever, try guys in new roles, and I guess we didn't even talk about it yet because it hadn't been a storyline for a few weeks there, but the other number that stands out there on the box score, 10 penalties, 105 yards. Can't go a full season. Can't close the season without the full start thing coming up again. They get a false start on the first play out of the second quarter, which is kind of like not sure how that happens. But all of this is culminating to say it's just not a serious outfit. Like, the team went 1-11, took very clear back steps from last year, which was itself a disappointment at 3-9, and it's just like the way this team has not found their way to wins. Like, this is not even like the apex of it. You held Old Dominion, maybe it's a little bit fake because the fumble on the 2-yard line that wasn't really a fumble. Maybe they get a field goal or a touchdown there, and it's a 34 or 30-10 game. But like, this ultimately, especially with the third-string quarterback, was not the worst effort of the season. You just saw a lot of the same symptoms, and it makes you go back, especially as App State finishes 5-7, loses in kind of heart-wrenching fashion to Arkansas State to miss a bowl this past Saturday. Why the heck were you down 31-0, and why did you lose 41-20 to that team? I know there's some App State bugaboo there that has never gone away for this program. Now 0-12 against them all time, but like, that wasn't a team that should have been at any point 31 points better than you and not a 21-point final score better than you. You're up 4 heading into the fourth quarter against Georgia Southern and let that game completely go away from you. Shouldn't have lost to that team by 17 when all is said and done. I don't think they were. I mean, they only lost by 12 against Marshall, but the box score and like the expected like post-game win expectancy tells you that they weren't really that close in that one. Just when you dive into the numbers, like, that's a game, especially at home, you should feel like you can win. Like, their only win was against an FCS team that won one game. They played themselves out of the close games that they were in. And then there were other moments where they just got completely played off the field. And yes, a couple of those times happened against either college football playoff teams or college football playoff snubs in Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. But just the word that comes to mind, and this is what I said back after the Vanderbilt game, is like they're unserious until further notice, or whatever it was I said. Like, it just hasn't been a serious effort. Like, this has not been anything resembling a program heading in a direction where they're going to make bowl games, contend for Sun Belt championships. And that was kind of the idea that was brought in when you were hiring a guy who had been at Georgia and Dell McGee, who hadn't been a head coach before but had been around several winning head coaches, and you thought would come in with an idea of take them the next step up from where they had been under Sean Elliott, where they were making bowls but not more than that. And it just feels so far away from that. I know you wanted to make a point on this where it's like, I think still that 2013, 2014 are the worst teams I've encountered. And the numbers kind of bear that out. As bad as this defense was, they gave up a hair under 38 points a game. Georgia State's defense in 2014 gave up over 43 points a game. Worse is a relative term, and I think that was worse, but at the same time, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is as bad as it's been for the program since it started, because you're through that area where you were transitioning to FBS and you didn't have enough scholarship players and guys that were built for this level. You didn't really prep for the jump as much as you could have because you needed to go when you got the call. You're past that, and this was supposed to be you taking that next leap, and far from happening, it feels like they've never been lower. And so as you're heading into the offseason, I don't know what's going to happen. As we're recording this, there's been no kind of announcement. I'm not expecting any news today, just from what I can glean. Doesn't mean something doesn't happen, as the 2023 offseason told us, because that coaching move could still come in a different direction. But the type of things you would have to do to overhaul this program in this offseason, just to suggest that you are unsatisfied and the changes are coming to make the program better. I just don't know if anyone's believing that changing out the entire coordinating staff, removing half of the coaches on staff is going to convince people that anything is going to be any different, because they overhauled the roster and they brought in a lot of new coaches this offseason, and it resulted in a worse product than the year before.
I agree. I was just looking to see, because this season reminded me of 2018 as well. And that was also a horrendous defense, kind of average-ish. You know, they did some good things on offense. They ran the ball actually a lot better than I remember them running the ball. So
Trey Barnett came on that season.
That
it was
correct.
like this guy, this tiny little running back's got something. And then the next year,
there was the Seth Page game versus ULM. What a time that was.
Quail P.
This season was frustrating because they just never really decided to be good at anything on the football field. And I know that sounds harsh. You know, I say this on our basketball pods, but with Georgia State basketball right now, the men's basketball team, nothing looks easy on offense. Nothing that they do on offense looks easy. Yes, they put the ball through the hoop sometimes.
Sorry to disappoint. We will not be diving into that, but everyone knows where our stance is on that program as well.
Exactly.
Postgame show will not be a double here. We've got too much to cover on the football side, but Cancun did not solve the Georgia State season on the men's basketball front. Sorry to say.
Somehow it didn't.
Somehow.
You know, with the football team this year, there's not a single thing that I can think of that really came easy to them. And that's the frustration. Playing defense did not come easy to them, as they were one of the worst defenses in the country. You know, offense, I mean, they averaged under 20 points a game. You know, like that's unless you are currently Ohio State's level defense, you're not winning many football games if you're scoring under 20 points a game.
Right.
That's basically 3 scores.
That was what Iowa did, but they had the best defense in the country most seasons when they were winning seasons like that.
And everybody would clown on them.
Giving up double the yardage.
Yeah, everyone would clown on them as soon as any team, if they could find a way to get that third score against Iowa, you knew that it was over. There were games where Iowa would lose 9-6. You know, like, and I say 3 scores because it doesn't really matter, you know, what combination of scorers. As soon as you got a touchdown and a field goal against Iowa in some of those years, it would be over for them. There was nothing that their offense could do. You know, they would have to block several punts and get like 4 safeties, you know. But that is what it seems like with this Georgia State team. Like there's nothing that they specifically did well. And I have to shout out, just because we're doing some shout outs, I have to shout out Jordan Simmons, because I was like, by the end of the year, Jordan Simmons actually looked like a good running back. And it wasn't until the Georgia Southern game did Georgia State finally break out of their rushing rut. But then I was like, well, Simmons didn't even have that great a game that day. And then you realize the running backs didn't break out of their rut. It was Cam Brown broke out of Georgia State's rushing rut, you know. And then they finally gave Simmons the ball against South Alabama, and then he ran with it. He had like 14 carries before that, up until that point in the season, for like less than 50 yards, you know. And so like it's this type of thing. Like, where is there somebody on Georgia State, whether it's the coaches, whether it's the players, whether it's the ball people, you know, where is somebody doing their job and excelling? By the end of the season, no, you couldn't answer that anybody was doing that. They hadn't scored 20 points against anybody since Coastal, you know, like that's, and Troy is playing in the Sun Belt Championship, which I even feel worse after my rant last week, since they were able to get there, but whatever. They'll probably get destroyed by James Madison.
I had a tweet out about it. Jared Parker, second year, Troy's going to the Sun Belt title game that won the West. If it hadn't been him, it would have been Charles Huff leading Southern Miss in his first season in Hattiesburg. Either of them will be playing second-year head coach at James Madison, Bob Chesney. You can't tell fans they have to wait anymore. Like, you cannot say this is going to be... Like, you can say this is going to be a rebuild, and then it's more impressive when you win, you know, go to a bowl game and win, because it's like, look, it's supposed to be a rebuild, and we're ahead of schedule. You can say all that stuff, but it can't be the reality that you're actually expecting fans to sit around for 3 seasons for there to be a winning season anymore. Everyone is flipping rosters.
And when I say winning season, I don't mean like, 5-7, real scrappy type season. No, like, they have, 3 wins the last 2 years? Like
2 FBS. 4 total wins.
My big issue with Georgia State is, and I don't even say this to get on Sean, Coach Elliott, because that, yesteryear's news, but I just talked about a year 2 where they won 2 games, and it was a bad year 2. It was a solid year 1, but a bad year 2. We're talking about 4 total wins. 2 FBS wins in year 2 of this current head coaching staff. Meanwhile, Charles Huff, Troy. Bob Chesney's about to go to UCLA after, dominating with James Madison.
If you want to stick in the state, Jerry Mack take Kennesaw to 9 wins in the Conference USA title game in year 1 after they won 2 games last season. I know that sticks in a lot of people listening to this as craw. Like, I don't know that. Like, I will always say, Georgia State and Kennesaw State's success do not cancel each other out. It is possible for both to be good at the same time. That's in basketball, that's in football. Them being good in basketball right now is not why Georgia State is bad in basketball. It's because made a bad hire. It happens. But for Georgia State fans who felt like they had at least been better than Kennesaw maybe 5 years ago, can't really make that argument anymore. Kennesaw's better in all 3 of the major sports by a pretty significant margin as we sit here today. And so I know that's going to bother people. I know that, and I'm not going to try and explain that away. Like, that's what sports is. You look at the teams you think you can be better than. You look at the teams that, you know people who went to school at or are in the same state, and you look at, like, why can't we be them? And I get it, and I don't have anything to say for you to make you feel better about it. Just kind of, it is what it is right now.
The floor was supposed to be bowl eligibility.
Right. Yes, Sean Elliott left a bit of a mess. He leaves in February. The roster's in a state of flux. He had already recruited a fair amount of players in December, joined the team that maybe weren't exactly going to be what Dell McGee was going to want to have when he brought in, like, his whole roster. But now we've gotten through an offseason where he's done that, and the results got worse, and you can't just point to February 2024 for forever. Like, at a certain point, it's ownership and it's your team and it's your program. And
February 2024 wasn't why the coaching, February 2024 is about roster construction, not game day decisions.
Yes, and those are still an issue, and it's identityless. I don't know what this program is trying to be on the field on either side of the ball. Like 2018, bad team. But they were running, they realized they had a nice quarterback in Dan Ellington. They were moving him. Defensively, they're running the same scheme that had been like one of the best in the conference the year before with just a lot of freshmen. Say what you will about Nate Fuqua, and I know a lot of people did not love him as DC, but like they had an identity on that side of the ball that they stuck to for ill or for good. For basically every season, he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia State. And in 2018, that went badly because he had a lot of young guys that were playing roles. And in 2017, he inherited a really nice defense that were able to, he had Shannon Sullivan, NFL cornerback. He didn't have that in 2018. He's playing Quay White, who became a really good corner over the course of his career, but was kind of thrown into the deep water there as a true freshman. This team, I don't know through 2 years and now 4 different coordinators combined, like what they're trying to do. I understand that part of it was we have got this great receiver, Ted Hurst, and we want to get him the ball in a lot of different ways, and that makes sense. But that doesn't make an offensive scheme. You're moving him around, using him different ways, that's fine, but there's never been a consistent effort to establish any kind of ground game. The offensive line play through 2 offensive line coaches has been really inconsistent, and this year especially been marred with a lot of that pre-snap stuff that is, we were talking about it before the pod, like Georgia State is the most penalized team in FBS this year, I think by a pretty decent margin, but they are like 126th in yardage. And it's because so many of those penalties, those 103 penalties, were of the pre-snap 5-yard variety, so they didn't add up on the tally sheet when you're looking at the yardage as much because it was less, but certainly those plays mattered. And it's just, where is the hands-on coaching coming and making this better? And it's why I say I don't know what the changes would bring. I don't know that any changes on the staff would really convince people it's going to get better quickly because you already replaced the offensive line coach. You already replaced the offensive coordinator. You already replaced the defensive coordinator. Things got worse, and now you're heading into a year 3 where it's, if you're making all these hires and you're 4-20, how many people are just going to say outright no to you on the phone because it's like, I see how this is going. I don't want to be looking for a job in another year. Like, if he is able to assemble a good staff and he's able to get names, the type of hires we are maybe expecting him to make from the jump here because of his kind of, what do you expect his Rolodex to be? I'll be the first to say I'm impressed because I didn't think he'd be able to make these kind of hires. I think this is a good fit. I think this could be the answer. But like as we sit here now, as he might be making changes on the staff and looking to bring in guys to replace them, I just can't imagine that he's going to get yeses from the top of his list because they're probably going to see from the outside and call a spade and say, I don't think this is going to work out, and I enjoy being employed. I don't like being on the job market every November, every December.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head there about the identity. Like, they have none. Do you want to know the difference between Georgia State's rushing this season and 2021 when they set a school record? Over 1,000, like 1,500 yards. Like, a significant. They would have to basically double their yardage from what it was right now this season. Like 1,500 yards and like 200 some odd attempts. And it's not like they pass well, you know.
Well,
like,
passing yardage has been good. Yeah.
Sorry, it's when I say pass well, I mean passing to the point where it's affecting games to a degree.
It just speaks to the philosophical point of like you can't build around unless you're going full air raid, and that's just what your identity is, and even your run plays or pass plays basically. You can pass for 260 a game, and that's great. And certainly it helped Ted Hurst become, as we talked about, probably a future NFLer. But we saw it with the 2014 team. There was Nick Arbuckle was chucking that thing around. Even with the 2015 team, where those numbers were absurd for Nick Arbuckle, and it was just a 6-6 team. If you don't have any semblance of a run game, if you don't rely on that, if you can't trust it, you're not going to have success as an offense. Like I would put that on the fact that of why they were so poor offensively. The last time they were under 20 points per game as a scoring average on offense was 2016, which I believe is still the program low in rushing yardage, which was something like 88 yards a game rushing. Like, there's not there's a through line there. Like, it's not just one-to-one, and the rushing got better as the season went on, and they were still losing games. So it's not like it's like a get out of jail free card to just like you're running the ball better, you're in the triple digits every game, ergo you're going to start winning games, because then there's still issues with the defense and all that. But it's a start, and it's so simplistic to be like he's the running backs coach at Georgia. Why aren't they running the ball well? But this was a program that had success running the ball. It was going to be a makeover in personnel, but it wasn't going to be a case where like you had to suddenly teach the people in this program what it was like to run the ball. Like that was the one thing most seasons that Sean Elliott's teams did well, even if they didn't always win the most games, or even if they didn't reach that top mark of winning the Sun Belt. They had that identity, and it's just been stripped from them. And it's confusing that it happened, because you would have thought that would have been at least the one consistent marker that would have been held over with the hire that you made. I don't know that Charlie Cobb thought that far ahead as far as like thinking that could be something that is connecting the two hires, and that make maybe the transition a little bit easier. But I can't imagine it didn't play at least a thought in his mind.
I will get on him a little bit for the running backs thing, though, because, all offseason we were pretty excited about the Branson Robinsons and the Rashad Amoses of the world, and they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything at all, and like it took Jordan Simmons finally to be the one back to have success. And I can tell that based on Robinson and Amos kind of have a similar running style, and that running style is very offensive line dependent. So I will give them some grace, but I feel like if you are the running backs head coach, you should be able to identify way sooner than week 7 that, hey, we have two really good bruiser type backs. We do not have the offensive line to support those types of backs. We should probably start playing our more shifty backs. And hey, what do you know? They did that, and they started to have way more rushing success.
Yeah, and like I think we thought when we talked about like the depth as a weapon, and like you can never have too many running backs or any position because injuries are a thing in college football. I think we kind of assumed there was a general plan as far as the running back room, and that didn't play out. Like it was kind of like guy gets a series here or there. For a long stretch of games, it would be like no one would get more than 8 carries in a game, and they're getting a lot of split carries. And I think part of it is probably wasn't their plan to lose Freddie Brock. Certainly, I think in hindsight, the way that the season went in Oklahoma State, I don't know that Freddie Brock would have chosen to leave again if he had a do-over either, but I think they would have been perfectly happy to just have him be the bell cow again, because by the end of 2024, whatever else was going wrong, he had started to have some of his best games. He basically helps you win the Texas State game because he has a great outing. That one busts a long touchdown. And so that's part of it. But, like, that's going to happen, and I just keep going back to the thought of, like, the way this is talked about, and some of the comments from Dell McGee himself from the podium, I feel like there's a piece of this that just feels like it's like losing players, the NIL happens, and we're going to try and keep guys, but we're going to lose guys, and we don't have enough resources, and yada, yada, yada. And it's kind of like, I don't know that Troy has a smaller NIL budget than you, but I don't think that they are like outspending you 3-1. Maybe they are outspending you, and maybe that's part of the reason why they brought in the players they did, had a lot more success, and go 8-4. But I would also point to a lot of the other differences on that staff where that defensive staff is a lot more experienced. And the guy who had never been a head coach before, had only been an offensive coordinator, got a bunch of guys who called defenses before on that side of the ball and took care of stuff and got it shaped up, whereas that wasn't the direction taken here. I still just offer questions about, like, if he brings in another 5 running backs, does he have an idea of, like, if he does he try to get Jordan Simmons another year? And at that point, if he's back, is he just going to be the running back 1 in his mind heading into 2026, or is he going to bring in 4 more guys who have been power conference running backs and just kind of let it all play out again like it did this year? Does he think Cameron Brown is the future quarterback? And if he does, how does he add to that room in a way that needs to happen? Like, you're losing TJ Finley, or you're losing Christian Bayer. Like, you literally need quarterbacks, but you also don't want to box out the guy that you think could be the starter and that you messed around with for the first. You played with the starting role at quarterback all season long there, or at least for most of the season, and it's like, I know that that's old water we've tread on already. In previous podcasts, I think maybe even a previous postgame show, we've talked about that. But all of these things are going in my mind as far as, like, these have all been handled badly for the first 2 seasons. So what is the evidence that it's suddenly going to be magically fixed in year 3? Like, you get a lot of leeway as a first-time head coach, but at a certain point that turns off. And I think it's at the point where you're 4-20 through 2 seasons and the same stuff continues to go wrong, and it doesn't feel like it's getting better. And so I feel like that's about where I run out of things to say, at least for this time. I mean, certainly we have pointed to some questions I would love to get answers to as to kind of how this season progressed the way it did and the choices that were made or weren't made. But don't have any bliss to offer anyone listening to this as far as, like, and Frank, I would be surprised if anyone's looking for it.
I don't know. If anybody has any, I genuinely would want to know what people are looking for, because I think I don't think the special teams was this bad last year. Like, I think by the end of the season, the field goals were something that you could point to as, like, yeah, we might have some hope for that going into next year, that it's better. And outside of the 60-yarder, we really didn't have any shining moments on that either. So it sucks to have this podcast and talk like this, but at the end of the day, that's just kind of the reality of Georgia State football right now. I want them to be good. You want them to be good. Fans want them to be good. At some point, somebody involved with Georgia State athletics should also want Georgia State football to be good. And I know that sounds harsh, but, like, until somebody shows me that Georgia State people want Georgia State football to be a serious endeavor, I don't know that we can continue to operate like it is a serious endeavor.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of punctuate that point, I don't even want to make the thing about, I'm sure App State people are very up in arms going 5-7. They obviously fired Sean Clark after kind of the way that tilted down, and it didn't get nearly this bad there. But you can obviously make a distinction that Appalachian State, which has won national titles at the FCS level, that came into the Sun Belt guns a-blazing and has been the top of the class for most of their time as an FBS member, not a comparable situation with Georgia State. But Colorado State, who's made as many bowls as Georgia State has since Georgia State made their first bowl, fired their coach in the middle of this season. It's been a few losing seasons. Jay Norvell had some success other places. Had been good in Nevada. Kind of turned them around a little bit. They said this was enough, and they went and got Jim Mora Jr. Huge coup. I thought maybe he'd even landed a power conference gig for how he had done at UConn. Nevada, who I just mentioned, they haven't made a move yet, but I think they're 2-10 maybe. Similar spot to Georgia State. They hired Jeff Choate before last season. Hasn't gone to plan for them. Wouldn't be totally shocked if they make a move there. There's comparable G5 programs that are not like you're comparing yourself to, like, the class of the Sun Belt, or what's like, look at what James Madison is able to do when they lose their coaches or whatever. Like, not playing that game. Just talking about measurable comparables to your program. Charlotte moves on from Biff Poggi after 2 seasons. Just immediately it is clear that it is just not going to work out. They make the move. They go get Tim Albin, who this year went horribly for Charlotte. They also won 1 game. Tim Albin built a winner at Ohio. Good coach. You probably on the balance of you'd rather have him right now than you would rather have than Dell McGee, just based on even just 1 season where they only won 1 game, just based on his track record. Comparable programs to you are making moves that say we don't think this is acceptable. So where do you want to stand on that? And that's ultimately where it's going to sit. And for Dell McGee, if he wants to be a part of this, if he also is kind of seeing there might be a better opportunity out there for the same or more money to do a different job. And then you have to square with the fact that there's the possibility you hired 2 straight coaches who were position coaches who then leave for different position coaching jobs. That would be a tough pill to swallow, but I think ultimately fans would be happy with it in this case to move on and get another shot at it. And as you look at this as like a measure of how the department is doing or how the athletic director is doing, there is certainly a case that it's like, yes, you are owning that this is a bad hire that you missed on if you make a decision to fire him right now. But if you look at the state of it, where football program is where it's at, the men's basketball program is where it's at, not making a move makes it symbolize that you are okay with it. And then if Dell moves anyway in a couple of months, you don't get the satisfaction of yourself saying, I don't think this is acceptable. You're just moving on and making another hire. So I think it's a blemish if you just say, it is what it is, we didn't make a good hire here, we need to move on, and you decide to fire Dell McGee. That's a blemish on Charlie Cobb's record. And now that would be, 3 straight major hires he would have gotten wrong. Or 2 straight, with Jonas. I think Sean Elliott, on the balance of things, great hire compared to how things have been going for both those major sports.
I was just thinking, I feel like I've heard less complaints about Charlie these days, but I feel like there are more things to complain about. So that's a little, square peg, round hole type situation.
Apathy setting in, and that's the dangerous thing. Which is a program that has struggled to get fan support, a program that has struggled to get the success they want. Like, the last thing you need is the people that have been bought in through all of this, through all the gory years, finally deciding, you know what, if they don't care, I don't care, and checking out. Which is a real concern at this point, because I think people are going to keep showing up on Panther Talk, on Twitter. You're not going to completely lose people because that is what college sports is. When you're in, it is really hard to just be out. Now, maybe you go to less games, maybe you contribute less, whatever it might be. But it is hard to get people who get into the diehard category out of it. But when you're heading into, assuming a move is made in basketball, which I do at this point, but assuming a move in football is not, I just don't know what you're selling heading into 2026 as far as this all heading in the right direction. Yeah, theoretically, it would be a new basketball hire that you could sell that, we've made a decision. And like I've said, I think on this pod before, I think basketball could be a pretty quick turnaround. I'm less worried about that long term. If you got it wrong, you move on, and you could still get a quality person in to replace Jonas, which, as we've kind of not even really danced around, just feels like an inevitability at this point, but somehow, when that happens,
by the grace of God, somehow that situation is even worse than this one. So it's tough.
It's relative,
but
because it's so far below the bar, and you've had success in that sport, but it feels more salvageable. So I don't know. I guess it's where you think on the 2 situations. Is it better to be hopeless but not adrift versus is it better to know that there is a standard that you can go back to? I don't know. I'm not saying it's a good conversation to have, but
it's one we can save for the midweek at this point.
Yeah, a lot emptied, a lot gone through here, and really no answers found. I'll be honest. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I'm sure I hit on a lot of points. David hit on a lot of points that people agree with, but we don't have all the answers here except to say probably we'll have more clarity in the next week just based on how things flip. However things happen or don't happen, I feel like, especially with signing day coming in the middle of next week, if stuff's going to happen, it's going to happen before that because otherwise it's a bit of a disaster. But we'll certainly have more of a glimpse by the time that happens because we record on Wednesday. So signing day will already have come and gone by the time we are next in your podcast feeds. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of the Thursday Night Postgame Show, as Georgia State are 27-10 losers at Old Dominion to wrap up the 2025 regular season at 1-11, 4-20 through Dell McGee's first 2 seasons as Panthers head coach. Anything more on any of the stuff we've just been talking about changes, we'll be back in the lab, breaking it all down, talking about it. But for now, thank you for listening to this episode of the Thursday Night Postgame Show. We will catch you next time on the Thursday Night Podcast.